What kind of abilities do you think you need to develop to be able to get to the end of your life having accomplished everything you wanted to? Who do you think has special powers to help you innovate a radically different life experience as your body gets older? A machine learning visionary? A wearable health device inventor? Today, we're going to talk about a game changer who can help unlock a side of your intelligence that allows you to make better decisions with no information, invent unprecedented solutions, and act smarter in chaos. You're listening to the Health Courage Collective podcast, episode 264, How Shakespeare Helps You Age Better. Welcome to the Health Courage Collective podcast, the show for normal women who want to age abnormally well. If you know that elite-level health and hormone results are theoretically possible for you, but you're not quite sure how to get there, how you're going to squeeze it into your schedule, or how to partner with a provider to make it actually happen, you're in the right place. I'm so happy you're here. Hi, my friend, and welcome to the episode today. I hope you are doing great. Have you had a bad day this past week? I hope not, but if you did, were you able to see a gift within it? There's nothing cooler than having unpleasantness actually make you better, right? If you're listening to this podcast, I assume it's because you care about creating a future where you can continue to learn and evolve and live and give more as you get older rather than less. You believe there's a practical and doable way to live right now that will reduce your risk of developing the common chronic diseases of aging over the next few decades. There is. So I'm grateful that you're here because I know that the future world needs you at your best. Even though none of us knows what the future might bring, aging differently than most people do requires an intelligent plan and execution of said plan. I believe a big part of that plan is understanding the statistically most likely things to take away your life and developing algorithms to live in such a way that you don't become a statistic. I'm all about risk stratification and analyzing all the data we can get our attention on. I love learning abstract concepts about optimizing our health through many iterations of habit installation and learning to make decisions based on measurements that need to surpass the standard of care. The logic of all of it feels satisfying to me, probably because we've all been taught that the definitions of intelligence and logic are interchangeable. Intelligence is logical and logic is intelligent. But what if we were all missing out on a huge part of intelligence that can help us live better lives, make better decisions, age more healthfully, and create the life that we really, really want? And what if I told you that the person who can best help us seize that missing part of our brain power and be way more intelligent than any computer right now, in the age of exploding artificial intelligence, lived from 1564 to 1616? Vincent van Gogh once said, "My God, the beauty of Shakespeare, who is as brilliantly obscure? But of course, reading Shakespeare can make you shocking to others and without wishing harm, offend society." Steve Jobs said that reading King Lear as a teenager transformed him from a conventional suburban kid to a driver of change. Steve Wozniak said of Steve Jobs, "From the day we met, he was talking about important people like Shakespeare that have really changed humanity forever." Ralph Waldo Emerson declared that while the greatest works of philosophy were conceivably wise, Shakespeare was inconceivably so. Charles Darwin used to sit for hours reading Shakespeare and imagining himself like Hamlet, who said, "I think that I am superior to the common run of men in noticing things which easily escape attention and in observing them carefully." In 1831, Darwin sailed around the world in the HMS Beagle reading Shakespeare and being struck by the incredible variety of a group of Galapagos finches of many species. In the 1930s, a young girl who memorized The Merchant of Venice was so inspired by Shakespeare that she grew up to be an extraordinary and world-changing author. Her name was Maya Angelou. One of the world's best communicators of all time serially recited Macbeth. On August 17, 1863, he sat upstairs in his house, the White House, and declared, "I think nothing equals Macbeth. It is wonderful." 3 months later, on November 19th, he delivered his most famous speech, the Gettysburg Address. Abraham Lincoln's ability to write well and emulate using riddles to make a point was no doubt contributed to by Shakespeare. Albert Einstein listed Shakespeare as one of his role models and a prime example of a creative naturalist. Ludwig van Beethoven viewed Shakespeare as his idol. Neil Armstrong's classmate said that he could quote from most of Shakespeare. Benjamin Franklin was sure to secure a copy of Shakespeare's complete works for the Library Company of Philadelphia so that any American colonist could read it. Thomas Paine taught himself to write by imitating Shakespeare. Marie Curie inherited a copy of Hamlet and said she willingly learned by heart long passages. Horatio Nelson referred to his junior commanders as his Shakespearean band of brothers. Dwight Eisenhower said that the highlight of high school for him was acting as the hero in a Shakespeare play. George Washington quoted Henry V to his army in November of 1783, calling his soldiers a band of brothers whose labors produced events which have seldom, if ever before, taken place on the stage of human action. Winston Churchill loved Hamlet and memorized Hamlet's whole mirror up to nature monologue, start to finish. Mary Shelley kept a copy of The Tempest on her nightstand as a teenager, and Shakespeare inspired her to innovate and craft Frankenstein by learning from Shakespeare's creativity. Mary Shelley inspired sci-fi authors Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. Alexander Graham Bell devoured Jules Verne and memorized Shakespearean passages. Robert Goddard, who invented the liquid rocket, was obsessed with H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds, inspiring his creative drive. Claude Shannon, who invented electric computing, loved science fiction and in his later years would copy out whole passages from Lord Valentine's Castle. Nikola Tesla read Shakespeare and would also recite Serbian epics. He memorized the plays of Johann von Goethe and said that reciting von Goethe's Faust spurred his ability to invent AC current. Karl von Clausewitz was a Prussian army officer born in 1780 who changed the world, not necessarily for the better, by completely changing war. Before Clausewitz, battles were won with logic, mathematics, data, charts, etc. That's what everyone did. That's how Napoleon had been so successful, until he wasn't, because Clausewitz came along. But Clausewitz studied Shakespeare, and while reading Hamlet, realized that the best plans were not logical. Logic is too predictable. Instead, the best plans were original and generated surprise. He tested his theories based on Shakespeare's works by teaching his students at the Prussian War Academy differently, and eventually his widow compiled his teachings into a big book called On War. His teachings were how the Imperial German Army was trained for World War II, effectively killing thousands of American soldiers. Even so, the U.S. Special Operations Forces currently refer to his big book as their Bible. Okay, so what does all of this have to do with being able to create a life you love that prevents or drastically delays all of the chronic diseases that are considered a normal part of aging? I love logic because that's what I was taught is the supreme high woo of intelligence. It's what all of us were taught intelligence fundamentally is. Compiling data from demographics, measurements, and averages, creating algorithms for everything, and processing massive amounts of data. Applying math formulas and programming people and groups with the right answers. I know I felt like I would like to be programmed to have all of the answers before, and I guess I kind of have been in a lot of ways because I've attended a lot of years of school after all, where I was taught how to use measurements and equations to solve problems and get the right answers, and that the purpose of stories is to communicate, and a little bit to be able to empathize with other people's emotions. Angus Fletcher wrote an awesome book called Primal Intelligence that goes through all of this in much more detail. I thought it was fabulous. I listened to the whole thing while stenciling my bedroom wall with 8-pointed stars. It turned out super cute. By the way, I used pearl paint and I love it. And then I decided to get his physical book from the library so that I could also read it with my eyes and take notes. Lots of notes. This is how I learned about all of the world-changing people I just mentioned who were inspired by Shakespeare. There's a lot more to the book than just Shakespeare inspiring people too. In it, he explains how his main life's theory is that story is not for communicating or empathizing, as we were taught in school. Story existed before communication, including language and even grunts and gestures, and that many animals, including crows, think in story. Thinking in story is the key to being intelligent in a way that is getting more and more rare, because it's far removed from the artificial kind of intelligence that we've become accustomed to. Angus argues that the first general-purpose electric computer was built in 1943, and since then, we've learned to think in demographics, averages, and probabilities. Smart kids today can solve math problems, but not life problems. Why? Because school has taught us to think like computers, instructing us to learn and think in a way that computers will always be able to do better, and ignoring the ways that we can think and learn and be smart in the ways that computers never will. In his book, he says education in a classroom is miseducation for life, and he was a devoted college professor for many years. We learn in school that intelligence and wisdom are the same thing as logic. Being smart means being logical, and that there's one right answer to every problem. Computers think in data and abstractions. We are also capable of thinking in data and abstractions, which is a good thing. Painfully slowly compared to computers, though, especially artificial intelligence like large language models. AI takes logic and optimizes and accelerates it. But while computers are not capable of more than that, our human brains are. Unlike computers, in addition to thinking in logic, our brains can also think in exceptions and anomalies, allowing us to spot opportunities and invent new solutions that computers never could. Computers dismiss exceptions and anomalies. What's really cool about our brains is that while AI is the king of big data choices, as soon as life requires choices with little to no data, AI fails. Being truly intelligent and making smart choices involves logic, but logic isn't enough. We also need the ability to make choices with little to no data, which means we need imagination, intuition, common sense, and the ability to use feedback from our flesh and bones to act intelligently in an unpredictable world. We need to be able to think in stories. As he explains in his book, story did not emerge for linear information transfer, to entertain, or to communicate. It evolved to keep us alive, to help us react intelligently to the unexpected. Angus says that AI is, at best, half intelligent, because it doesn't have the mental hardware that animal neurons evolved more than 500 million years ago to do. Invent action. He says that AI is half of our gray matter accelerated and the other half lobotomized. It will forever be incompetent at innovation and strategy, communication, and leadership. End quote. Brilliant, don't you think? In school, we were taught to think exclusively in logic and that there is one right answer. We're taught to dismiss our intuition and feel foolish or helpless if we don't get the right answer, not to invent our own answer. We've been trained to use logic, but logic requires data. In real life, data is almost always in short supply. Angus says that without story, our intelligence in the face of no information is as useful as an empty spreadsheet. Our non-logical intelligence isn't arbitrary. It evolved millions of years before computing, giving us and our primordial ancestors the ability to succeed in the unknown. Pretty cool, right? Another quote from him is, "Your story generates your life plan, which generates all of your other plans. Thinking in story is primal because it's part of our ancient nature, requires biological hardware that computers lack, and is neglected in modern school that tries to teach us to think like computers. Once you go full primal, you can incorporate your whole intelligence into everything you do." End quote. I'd encourage you to read the book Primal Intelligence if you're interested in all of the parts of what he calls going full primal. There are 4 parts: intuition, imagination, smart emotion, and common sense. These 4 things work together to help us create smart plans that work even amidst chaos with little to no information. Sounds like what could happen as you get older, right? Angus Fletcher works with U.S. Special Operations to train the kind of people who, if we knew what they did, they'd have to kill us, by using Shakespeare to get better at thinking in stories. Story isn't just fanciful or fun. It can save your life or create the kind of life you want, neither of which could possibly come from being programmed like a computer. The first part of thinking in story is intuition, which comes from noticing exceptions. Computers cannot process exceptions. If they hit an anomaly, they skip over it. The more time we spend with machines, the more we start to think like them. Do you know who was a master at developing exceptions and anomalies? Yes, Shakespeare. Hamlet was a deep-thinking action hero. Cleopatra is a cunning intriguer with a vulnerable heart. Falstaff is an old man who behaves like an adolescent. Developing your intuition by getting better at spotting anomalies and exceptions to rules and sitting with them rather than skipping over them the way a computer would helps you think in story and get more intelligent. You will likely be the exception to many rules in your lifetime, so in order to overcome health or any other challenges as you age and make good decisions, you need to develop your intuition. The second part is imagination. We're often taught that stories are products of imagination, but Angus Fletcher says that that's backwards. He says story is what creates imagination. Logic can only compute what is probable based on past data. Story teaches us how to leap into the future. Story doesn't need reliable data to be able to act with initiative amidst uncertainty. Story begets imagination. Imaginative stories allow us to operate with little information in uncertain environments that would crash a computer. Logic can solve math problems, but imagination born of story can solve life problems. When you have no information, you need imagination. Imagination can integrate past, present, and future and help us invent the kind of life we want to live, even if we've never seen it done before. Emotions help us think in story because they're the monitor of our mental life narrative. Emotions teach us to redirect when our life story is departing from the ideal. In the book, he goes through exactly what to do to use fear, anger, grief, shame, and anxiety to operate at a high level the way U.S. Special Operations are taught to do. It's pretty great. He tells us that we're taught emotions exist to help us identify and empathize with others, but what emotion is really for is to help us see inward and diagnose when our story is faltering or succeeding. Intuition and imagination reveal what could work in the future, and emotion reveals what has worked or is working right now in our life plan. Emotions teach us what is important to us and act like indicator lights on the dashboard, helping us take the kinds of actions that allow us to change strategies if needed so that we can get to our desired destination. The last part of Primal Intelligence is common sense. Angus explains that all humans, even children, are smarter than AI because they can perform a simple mental operation that AI cannot. Can you guess what it is? It's being able to know when you don't know. I'd never really thought about this one before, but he explains that while AI wants to tell the truth, if it's queried about something it doesn't know, it can't know that it doesn't know. Being able to think in story allows us to detect when we can no longer extrapolate from past trends that we've witnessed. Computers can only be programmed to recognize known unknowns, but story gives humans the ability to detect unknown unknowns, and this is the basis of common sense. In his book, he says, "So many human brains now suffer from unproductive anxiety, chronic hesitation, and analysis paralysis because they've been trained in school and business to imitate computers, amassing facts and acting only when certain that they're right. By doing so, they're acting against their nature, which is to have a bias toward action that is interrupted only if the brain realizes that its current conduct won't work. Most folks act the opposite of common sense. They stress about things that have happened already and act to prevent things that have never happened. Do the opposite." End quote. Common sense is huge for being able to live differently than most people, avoiding or drastically delaying the most common chronic diseases of aging, having a bias toward action, and being able to tell that you don't know something can help give you more as you get older. Thinking in stories helps us age better and live better. Thinking in story helps us to use all of our intelligence instead of just half of it. When we think in story, we can act intelligently without having all the facts. We can invent a new way forward. We can see a way to become an exception to the rule. While it's super common to get to your later years with dangerously fragile bones, plaque in your arteries, urinary incontinence, low toe strength, chronic pain, and forgetfulness, there are people who don't. You can learn from Shakespeare how to think in stories in a way that allows you to be an exception. Innovate. Learn from your emotions and recognize when you don't know what you don't know. You are smarter than AI and can consciously hone your story thinking skills to lean into that human intelligence even more. The most important narrative running all of the time in our brain is our own life story, the story we think to ourselves about ourselves. Story evolved in the brain so that we can make smart plans to make our life story what we want it to be. There's a quote from Dwight Eisenhower that says, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything. The very definition of emergency is that it is unexpected. Therefore, it isn't going to happen the way you are planning. So the first thing you do is take all of the plans off the top shelf and throw them out the window and start once more. But if you haven't been planning, you can't start to work, intelligently at least." End quote. So all of this thinking in story and planning for our future isn't because we're going to create a bulletproof plan that is guaranteed to work perfectly. It won't, no matter how good it is. It's so we get better at planning, so we know how to intelligently alter our plans when life throws a wrench in them, which it will. And thinking in story allows us to know how to do that with little to no information. It allows us to use our intuition to spot exceptions to rules and our imagination to invent solutions no one has ever dreamt of before. Intuition perceives the world's hidden rules and it sparks plans. Intuition initiates your life story by revealing what's different about you and about your world. Imagination creates the future and shapes your plans into something you can actually take action on. Imagination enables your brain to overcome problems and spot opportunities to act. Emotions know the path of personal growth and sustain your life plan, helping to keep you on track. Emotions signal when things are working and when we're struggling, and keep us pointed in the right direction. Common sense helps us decide wisely in uncertainty. Common sense selects the best plans, indicating which story is best in which life situation. The powers that come from thinking in stories are innate within us, impossible for AI, and completely ignored by schools. But it's the key to the cleverness of Steve Jobs, Maya Angelou, Abraham Lincoln, Nikola Tesla, and so many more world-changing thinkers. You can be more clever too. And living life differently than most people and staying healthy in our toxic world requires cleverness. As Angus Fletcher notes, another term for story is plot, and another term for plot is plan. And a plan is a path through life. New plans are new stories. If you can invent one, you can invent the other. I think this applies so well to getting through life, especially with our human bodies that require more deliberate attention and playing the margins tighter as we get older. Angus teaches U.S. Special Ops to use Shakespeare to see the future faster, choose wiser in life and death situations, and invent new things like handheld GPS and quick clotting medical gauze. So why not let Shakespeare help you gain muscle as you get older? Lower your risk of cancer and take up kite surfing in retirement or whatever you want to do. There are a lot of health-related things I think AI can help with, like reading CT scans and developing new drugs. But so much of life requires making decisions without good information. And we don't have to be scared of that when we possess the story-thinking powers of Shakespeare. If we can learn how to add thinking and story to what we already do, which is think and logic, we can use all of our primal powers to act intelligently in a world of unknowns, plot twists, and anomalies. Getting past age 80 with fewer limitations than most people requires acting differently than most people do, starting right now by making and following an intelligent plan. One that you'll likely have to take off the top shelf and throw out the window at some point. But having made that plan and being able to think bigger than just logic allows is what will help you adapt and even enjoy the ride through the chaos that we call life. You can make better decisions when you use both sides of your intelligence and hone your intuition, innovation, smart emotions, and common sense. The book Primal Intelligence has some exercises to beef up your abilities to think in stories, which is great, but just engaging more with masterful stories is a life hack that improves your holistic intelligence. I was reading the other day about how wisdom is feminine in nature, and true wisdom is not knowing more, but being able to know with more of yourself. I think being able to reason with more powers than just logic alone helps you know with more of yourself. Thank you so much for being here today and thinking about how William Shakespeare can help you be more creative, innovating the kind of future that you want. We can't possibly know what all is going to happen to us in the future, but we can know that being able to access more intelligence than just logic opens up a new world of possibilities. Next week, we're going to talk about screening tests that can help us live more as we get older. Until then, reject the idea of only being half intelligent. Act smart in chaos, and don't be normal. Pat yourself on the back for sticking with it till the end of this episode. I know your attention is valuable, and I don't take it lightly. I'm so grateful that you care about not settling for anything less than world-class care and results. Strong women who feel good change the future. I'd appreciate it so much if you'd share this podcast with a friend so we can make elite-level perimenopausal outcomes the rule rather than the exception. This podcast is for entertainment and information purposes only. Statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Christina Hackett and producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse events caused by use of information contained herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.